Stan, thank you so much for coming to Fraud Busting. I'm really honored that you took the time to come on.
Oh, it's a sure. I enjoyed working with you. Glad you got to be in class with me. About what's it been, a year ago?
It's been more than that. It's been like probably 2 years.
We had a blast.
Yeah, maybe more. So you are the lie guy, and just so everybody knows, Stan is one of the people who has helped me perfect and really dial in my lie detection body language skills, because that's mostly what I do with my time, and is tell people how to spot a liar, lies, fraud, and identity theft hidden in plain sight. And I tell people this story about your class because, I've been to several of them, and yours was just, I think, the longest and definitely the best one that I went to. A couple things always happen in these classes is that I walk in and everyone looks at me because I don't have a gun. And I'm not wearing cargo pants. And so I always end up with a separate introduction from everybody else. But the first one I went to, which was actually with Stan Slowik, who I think the Reid Technique guy, and this is true, and it's embarrassing. They handed us a class list, and it had everyone's name on it and their job, and there was 5 guys in there, and their title was polygrapher, right? And I'm sitting next to the only other woman in the class, because there's probably 35 people in there, 2 women. I was one of them. And I kind of nudged her and I said, these guys have 5 wives and they're putting it on the class list. I'm like, what is the deal? And she goes, no, it's polygrapher. It's the polygraph guys. You're thinking polygamists.
That's great.
So anyway, yeah, I'm definitely, I just kind of hang out on the fringes of law enforcement and picking up their skills and putting them in business. So tell everyone, like, what do you do? Because you're the lie guy, but what does that really mean?
Well, let's see. For almost 40 years now, I've been involved in training law enforcement in most critical skills that we're going to share today that I think our potential fraud victims, they can be investigators, they can be interrogators, and how they can use that skill to help protect themselves. When I train on interview and interrogation, the majority of the cases ever solved are through that initial interview of not only suspects, but a lot about victims and witnesses. And so I teach them, first of all, how to harvest that information from people that sometimes they have information they don't know is important. One of the cases, you were talking about sharing cases before we started. I was working a homicide down in Alabama, and a woman had survived an attempt on her life by the killer. And long, complex story, the guy wound up killing 7 women over a bunch of states. And by miracle, he had her in her house. They were going to tow his car. And he got up and left to argue with the record driver. Oh. She locked the door. Okay. And when he tried to get back in, he's beating on the door. The neighbors called the cops. So I was asking about particular intimate activity that was involved. She had engaged this guy. And so I asked her a very intimate question about what was happening in the bedroom, which was key to his behavior.
Okay.
And she told us, had been like 3 years earlier. And she told us what was going on. Well, the homicide guy next to me was stunned. He said, we've talked to you several times. You never told us that. Why didn't you tell us? And she said, I didn't know it was important, and you didn't ask me.
Oh, well.
So some of the things I want your viewers to think of and your audience to think of, I didn't know I was going to get defrauded. Maybe if we started asking more questions and not be afraid to ask, to find that information, we can make better decisions about, do I invest in this IPO? Do I really need to give this guy my credit card? Does this really a legitimate bank account or a bank loan application? So just a thought. So that kind of got me started. And then one of the things, we have to think like bad guys. And I'm going to get you into this advanced class.
I can't wait to go. I want to go.
This is the one, Traci didn't tell you all, but I've been in 38 prisons. Visiting,
right? Not incarcerated.
But I got the idea, who better to talk to about criminal activity like fraud than somebody who's done it? And I learned this from an old sergeant, economic crime sergeant, and he did counterfeit checks and he did identity theft, same things that you and I have worked on for years. Mm-hmm. And we had caught this guy, and he was defrauding banks and so forth. And we sat down with him. And ask them, how do you do it? How do you pick out those people? Now, I want your folks that are listening to and watching to think about this. The guy said, I can walk into a bank and I can tell which teller is not paying attention, who's distracted, who's got their mind somewhere else. And that's the person that I picked to go to because they're not engaged, they're not aware of their surroundings. So that's the one that I'll get. And then when they start to act like, I don't want to do this, or we can't give an account, he said, I start threatening a lawyer or lawsuit, or I get upset, and immediately they cave because they want to be complete customer service professionals, that they give up too much and they let their guard down.
Oh, wow. So it's the same person who's not engaged that's going to cave really quick.
Yeah, because they're overwhelmed with so much information.
Uh-huh.
And in the pattern that these guys use, and it's typical of all deceptive people, not only in identity theft and fraud, but in just in lying to us in general, the way they manipulate people. So I've been training law enforcement investigators how to get information from victims and witnesses. It's vital to move the case forward, but also how to understand, how did that subject, the bad guy, get to that point? What was part of his plan and his behavior? And if we go in an interview and look back and talk to those people, debrief them, we'll understand where our risk points are. So the prison business I've been is an advanced class, and I just, before you came on, I got an email from the 5th Group Special Forces at Fort Bragg. I worked with them before. They want to do the whole 4-block series, the level 1, 2, 3, and 4. We go to prison, and we go to prison. They'll get to sit down. They're going to sit and interview inmates, and they have nothing about them. They don't know who they are or their background. And I want to see, can they find the right topics to ask the right questions about? Where's the bad guy vulnerable? And learn, how do you talk to a burglar? Well, how do you pick the houses? Now we can create prevention measures. How do you manage identity theft? Well, this is what I do to people. If we learn that, then we can protect ourselves.
Oh, wow. Okay. So let's circle back to the bank teller who's not engaged.
Right.
Because I've never thought about doing that when I walked into the bank. But I'm going to the bank today if they'll let me in, because we're just opening up here in Colorado, and other parts of the country are more open. But what's the sign? Like, how are we gonna, like, I have some ideas on what a disengaged person looks like, right? Because they look bored. And like they don't have a sparkle in their eye of any sort. But what's your tip on that?
Well, you can see if they're distracted by a magazine, if they're distracted by the work, they're not looking up. I was a director of security bank, in fact, for 4 years, and I taught counterfeiting and fraud and so forth. And I always told our tellers, for example, you got a big line, and we want to be very customer service oriented. And you got 2 or 3 people, take a second, look back, and said, I'm sorry, folks, we're a little busy, but I promise I will get to as quickly as I can. That does great things to confirm the customer, I have seen you. Bad guys don't want to be seen.
Okay. All right.
And so if I continue this open customer service, making eye contact, hey, hi, how are you doing? How are you doing today? And so forth. Like at Walmart and at Lowe's, if you get within a certain distance of their service personnel, they greet you. Well, that's a great customer service thing, but it's also very good of telling people, I'm aware you're here and what you're doing. We had
okay. So it's simple things.
Just a little simple, and it doesn't cost you anything. The simplest safety and security measures are procedural without spending a dime. Just a way to think. Just remind me, I had an advanced class in Fairfax, Virginia, and had a true kleptomaniac.
Oh,
the person who really gets the arousal from boosting and stealing stuff from stores. And she said, there are days that you just don't feel it. It just doesn't give you that thrill that you want. You don't have it. And other days, it just that you'd really get off on it. And it's because when you almost get caught, and you got an armload of clothes, you get rid of the dressing room, and the clerk comes over, ma'am, we can only take 3 or 4 items in or whatever, and to confront them and know that you've conned them, and then turn around and walk out of the store right after you confront them and walk out without the merchandise. He says, those are the great days. So how do we know that behavior? We can prevent behavior.
Okay.
So you spent time seeing, you've learned how they do it, how they get there. So now you're making the customer aware, making the public aware. This is how somebody's going to come after my identity. This is how they will use me. So we build protections, crime prevention, risk management by teaching that sets of skills.
customer service, basic customer service will run off a lot of fraud. Okay.
Oh yeah.
So,
And
so
do great
let's,
for your customer rating.
absolutely. So let's go back to, the basics of what you teach in your classes. Okay. Cause you have a technique that's just a little bit different, like a narrative based interview technique, right? Which is the same as interrogation. Tell us a little bit about that, how it works, why it's different, how people can use it to, because really what we want to do is get to some kind of confession or avert some kind of behavior that is omnipresent. So talk about that for a little bit.
There's two primary types. All interviewing falls into two primary forms. There's a narrative or information-based goal. Then there's accusatory guilt assumptive. Okay, and the guilt assumptive, a lot of times confirmation bias comes into play. That could be everything. Okay, it can be from gender, it could be appearance, it could be you or the boyfriend, the girlfriend has had a problem, and we immediately assume and we reverse engineer, maybe that's the right word, but we decided, well, he's got to be guilty of something, let me find it. And so we convince ourselves. So we've got the guy on the crime. Had an agency, we're talking about confirmation bias. And that's when you accuse a person, and if the answer doesn't give you what you want, you reject it because it doesn't fit your theory. So you need to flip the theory the other way. Ask for us as much information as possible, then what you start including what's missing. But the lieutenant from the unit call said, I have a problem with my guys with confirmation bias. And he said, I don't know how to explain it to him. And I said, watch the movie Midway. Lieutenant Commander Layton was in charge of intelligence in Hawaii before the attack on Pearl Harbor. He had warned the Navy and warned Washington, D.C. that what he thought Japan was going to do, that they were gearing up. And they rejected it. And so when Admiral Halsey is appointed, he's a new chief, he's out there in the Navy, and he's out there at Pearl Harbor, Layton comes in to offer his resignation. And Halsey said, why would you want to do this? He said, because I was in charge of the greatest intelligence failure in military history. He said, did you tell anybody what you thought? Yes, I told Washington. What did Washington say? He said, Washington had made up its own mind before they saw the intelligence. If it didn't match what they thought they knew, they rejected it. And that's where they made the mistake. So we have to avoid that bias. So a narrative-based interview, I try to garner as much information as possible. I don't say who, what, where, how, when, and why. Tell, show, describe, or explain. And first of all, it opens up the dialogue between you and I. Tell me what happened. For example, if I were to say, who were you with last night? And you might say, my husband, we had spaghetti dinner.
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's say I asked you, tell me about the person you were with last night, or tell me about who you were with. And so now I said, well, it's my husband. We're all crazy about this COVID stuff, and he was off, and so he cooked, and but we really like to go out. And now we get a difference in story, different the length. Lincoln's Gettysburg Address is 272 words long.
That's it, 272.
That was it.
That's
written on the back of an envelope. And the average length of questions of who, what, where, how, when, and why, or yes or no questions, those are the most commonly asked questions in interviews. Study shows that those two questions only gather combined 15 words in an answer.
And you want to expand that, right? Because the whole idea is information recovery. So go over again, what are the best questions to ask?
Tell, show, describe, explain.
Oh, I love that.
And for example, let's say I get a robocall. One of the 15 I get during the day.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, just for the grins and giggles, I'll answer one. I'm here. Now, of course, they got the car warranty thing. And the number, because my area code is 859 on my cell phone, although I live in Florida.
Right.
They're spoofing. And we're on the side of the warranty. I said, really? Tell me about your company. Where's the headquarters? Well, we have the warranty. No, that's interesting. Tell me your company name. Where's the headquarters? Oh, we're in Los Angeles. Okay. I'd like to look at your website. Can you, for a second, give me your website. I want to see how your reviews are going. Give me your website address. Well,
I
how
can't
old
do
is
it.
your car? But I want to look at your website because I look to see how the people. So part of manipulation is never answering your questions. So you can't make an informed decision.
Right.
Tell, show, describe, explain.
Oh, I love that. So let's talk, because I think that leads us to something pretty interesting. And me and you have had a lot of discussions on this, because people ask us on Facebook about false memories, because we're heading into an election cycle.
Well,
And I
God save
know we
us.
discussed this on Brett Kavanaugh
Mm-hmm.
and his accusers of sexual abuse, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And we have it again with Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm.
And here we have these women that are, I mean, when I look at it and when you look at it, it's pretty evident they are congruent with
Mm-hmm.
sexual abuse for sure, sexual inappropriateness for
Mm-hmm.
sure happened. But there's also, because I remember you emailed me some info from the FBI on false memories. And so
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about that a little bit and get a little bit deeper there.
Mm-hmm.
Now that we know what questions to ask, how to get people to talk and
Mm-hmm.
uncover a lot more information recovery, where's the line there between
Yeah.
false memories and what's real and interrogations? Let's talk
Yeah.
about that.
If the most important interview that investigators have is going to be the victims and witnesses.
Mm-hmm.
That's their greatest source of information. Think of, I'm trying to think of a case example. If I were to say, for example, say we had a robbery of the Dewdrop Inn.
Okay.
Some idiots robbed the place, okay? And so he robs the bar and he leaves. And so the first patrol officer comes, tell me what happened. I was robbed.
You're
What
right.
looked like? He had a gun.
Uh-huh.
He's a big gun, right? Not this big, but it could launch a Volkswagen. That's called weapon focus.
Uh-huh.
And so the patrol officer gets frustrated. Come on, you got to tell me what happened. I did. What do you look like? And they keep asking the same questions.
Mm-hmm.
So instead say, tell me what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it is, some of the things that's the worst is getting a description of someone. He's anywhere from 5'10" to 6'4", weigh 180 to 325 pounds, and it's just all over the map. People
Mm-hmm.
are very, very bad at ages and weights.
Mm-hmm.
So the officer, instead of saying, okay, was he wearing a dark shirt with a label on it? And so your brain retrofits that. That's
Mm-hmm.
contamination. Her name will come to me in a minute. She's one of the really good in Loftus, Elizabeth Loftus, really good about memories about victims. And little subtle things like that can contaminate the memory. For example, instead ask, how would you describe, what parts of his skin could you see? Okay, so right now somebody said, you were home with Tracy, what parts of your skin could you see? Okay, well I said I could see her arms because she had short sleeves,
Mm-hmm.
and she had a kind of a cowl neck shirt on with a blue stone that matched the blue. And so instead of saying, was she wearing a blue shirt?
Right.
My mind goes back to fit that. It
Right.
fills
Yeah.
that in.
Those leading questions. And I think we both worked on cases where the police just sits there and contaminates the victim or the witness. Yes. And it's like, from my perspective, it's infuriating because I'm never usually in, like, I'm looking at the tape after the fact. Right.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah. But so, how do we get around that? How does that create memories? Like, what can we do?
Well, over time, the memory elements begin to fade. There's multiple types of memory. We have what's called flashbulb memory and procedural memory and so forth. And so the fringes, remember, like a flash goes off and you temporarily got that little circle in front of us. And so over time that fades. And so the main pieces stay, but then to keep things make sense, to keep continuity, we kind of fill in what makes sense. Now, here's a picture. That's me and my cousin Timmy. Oh yeah, that's what we at the lake. It was a family reunion. So we try to make something that explains it, makes sense of that picture, and we fill in to be a cohesive story. So the longer the time progresses, the more clouded those memories become.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's some spikes.
Right. Significant emotional events will spike a memory to where it is pretty accurate.
For one thing, for example, think of that spike and a momentous decision in a job interview. When you're hiring an employee, for example, I led the program to rewrite the policy on electronic data storage.
Okay.
Wow, that's cool. Tell me, what moment did that happen? Tell me about when you realized you had a problem with that. Because that's a main decision, right? And if they're going, well, they probably have just picked up somebody else's excuse. They just padded their resume with.
Oh, wow. For job interviews. Yeah. Because, 40% of people lie in a material way on a job interview.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or on their resume somehow. So I think that's good. So say that question again so people can get it and write it down.
Okay.
That was awesome.
For example, if you were to say to me, okay, I'm Christian. My dad was a Baptist minister. Okay. Tell me about your conversion experience. That's something very important in my life, right? So I remember being 8 years old, and my dad was a pastor, and we talked about it a lot, and he wanted to make sure that it was just not following kids, but I really understood the process, before we went through that. So ask someone, example, with your husband, think of the time that the moment that you decided to get married and when you felt committed this was going to happen. And that you'll know that moment in your head.
Oh, I'm going to ask him that. Poor guy.
Or when I made a decision to quit a job, or I made a decision to start a project. Tell me about that moment when you made that decision. Where'd that genesis come from? When did it start that you made this plan? And so when we look at a sequence with bad guys, they can tell us that moment, and I can see in their behavior in my interview, what were you doing before that? How did you get to this point? What was happening right before that? So my victim can tell me that, and then my suspect, when I'm debriefing them, I can pick out, going through reverse order, that distorted thinking, planning, preparation, event horizon event. Here's a good one to think of. You remember when you were on the stage at NSA, and it was the Shark Tank?
I do. And it's funny, when you said peak moments, that's what I thought about. Now, for people who don't know me, I was asked I got a chance to pitch to some of the sharks from the TV show Shark Tank at the National Speakers Association on the main stage. And presenting on the main stage is a career moment for any speaker. There's 2,000 of people out there who,
the best of the best.
The best of the best, not only the best of the best, but the people who you need for referrals, people you have to see again. And I'm on a new script with sharks that had been chummed in the water in front of everyone. So yes, I remember that. And I don't know if I told you this, I was backstage shaking beforehand.
Yeah, we talked right before that. And I was trying to calm you down because you were, what do I ask? I said, you're the expert in you, just be you.
I was a mess, but you know what? After that was the biggest high ever. And it's made every speech since then just easy as pie, because nothing has been that high of a stakes, nothing. So
ask the employee, tell me about those moments. Now, in your job career, you can't ask about marriage and things like that, obviously, because of the hiring process. But tell me, what was in this? So what was the thought in your mind, and what did you come up with that moment? And they should be able to tell you if it's that key moment within his career path. When you decide to leave one job and take another, or why are you leaving? What are you looking for from here? My youngest daughter does a lot with nonprofit groups.
Okay.
And she'd worked for one nonprofit group. She moved from Kentucky down to Florida right before we did. And she was interviewing for the job of executive assistant. And the soon-to-be boss asked her, Allison, why this job? She said, and it was an even fight between her and another lady. We're very qualified. Allison said, I've always preferred to work with someone who were trying to make a difference in the world. And I like to do that here. And that's the phrase that's today that she remembers and her boss remembers.
Oh, wow. So that was kind of a peak interview moment. Okay.
Now, when we got our new CEO, Mary Lou Peck.
Right, because you're on the board of
board
NSA,
at that
National Speaker Association. You are making it happen. It's been a tough year.
Yep.
And I thank you for your service, because I know what it's like.
But that was one of the things I asked, because I want to hear it from Mary Lou Peck. And I asked her, I said, you've had opportunities with other people, could have gone before. Why us?
What'd she say?
And that was that seminal moment. You could see the entire board. Not that they weren't, we already knew because of just her bearing and her presentation, that she was top drawer right off the bat. But she went personal for that few moments and told us about her background and who she is and why she wanted to be here. And that's when I leaned over and talked to Casey Carpenter. I whispered, this is our new CEO. Before we voted.
Did she know who you were before she went into the interview?
No, she had no idea. She had not met us. That was her first interview. So think of that moment. Ask more from the other person than you're giving.
Mm-hmm.
So I tell my interviewers, if you're asking, tell me, or show me, or describe, explain, that elicits a comment. If the answer is longer from the person than your question, then you're doing a good interview.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're getting short answers, then you're too narrow.
Oh, that's super interesting. So let's talk about that a little bit. Because we know what the interviewer needs to do a little bit. What are some tells that people aren't being straight with you? And I mean, there's a lot with body language. I talk about that, but how can people look at the whole person, listen to what they say, see what they do, and go, wait a minute, that's someone whose pants are on fire? What do you have a favorite tell to look for, or how do you approach this?
You know, I've talked before. Body language is very, very heavily weighted with emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And so I see that if I have the wrong emotion at work, if a person's very emotional, not cognitive, not thinking, emotion keeps you and I from getting that conversation because they're kind of locked in.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they're angry, or for example, very depressed, we have to heal that first before we start exchanging information. So then I go, well, tell me about what happened. I want to help you. I know this is a traumatic event. Start from the beginning and tell you what happened. And so I listen to the sequence. One of the 4 areas in an event is what's called VAST, V-A-S-T. V is in victory, for visual, auditory, spatial, and temporal.
Okay.
So, for example, this is what struck me. So yesterday we got a 110-pound German Shepherd. Okay,
yesterday.
Rescued.
Oh,
no, we haven't. But yesterday, he didn't like to be outside. He's 110 pounds. He's all coat, and this Florida 90% humidity. He's suffering. So he wants to be in the house. And my wife has been taking care of our great grandbaby, and so mom was not there with him. He will not stay outside. Rarely.
Yeah.
So I took him in yesterday morning up the backyard about 9 o'clock, and you got to sit there and wait for him, and he decides he does his business, and then he follows you back in the house. So I came back in the house. Now, if you're watching with him, I came back in the house. Well, it so happens that swing where I sit is right on the other side of this wall outside.
Okay.
And you come around this way to our kitchen, sliding glass door, where Lanaya is by the pool. And if you notice, it said, and you see my movements, okay, he came back in, he comes to there, and he sat in the sliding glass door. He's sitting right there. I said, come on in. He laid down. I thought, something unusual. I was turning the fans on the lanai, and I left him. He stayed there for 30 minutes. So now my description, notice I have the visual representations of his weight, his description, of the door, of the swing, of the heat, okay, auditory, and I said, come on in, and he didn't come in. And I'm talking spatial because I'm setting for you like setting chess pieces on a chessboard.
Yeah, I can feel it and see.
And so you can see my story. That's when you got a genuine story. So, for example, with Jesse Smollett, he jumps those blocks. He misses big parts of that. He rehearsed the scene, but it was not the way the scene occurred, in my opinion.
Oh, and right. So yeah. Well, and just because he was found, just as a refresher, he was the one who faked an attack on himself for some racial purpose, or probably to get attention for his career.
But I've seen it with a security guard that faked he was assaulted by an employee. I've seen faked robberies that way.
Oh, really?
Faked assaults on campus that way. They'll stage something and they think they get all memorized. And it's called reality monitoring. We monitor all those elements. So those key pieces are going to go back to, tell me about the moment when you decided to change the policy. So that'd be a similar moment. So that information is all embedded in there.
Well, right. But see, lies also, and I think you said this in your class, it's pretty common, but lies aren't connected to timing or emotions or any of that sensory type stuff, right? It all has to be filled in. And if you can't fill it in, that's when you know you got someone who's trying to snow you right there.
But we can use that same thing to do a better job interviewing victims. We help them with that. Describe the smells, describe the sounds. What did his voice sound like? Let's go back to the pretend robbery at the bar. How would you describe his hair? Did his haircut or style remind you of someone else? Who would it remind you of? And you help pull those elements together.
Oh, okay.
So that's the way we work with victims. Now, when I ask the bad guys about, and they've got, for example, traffic stop. Let's do it the other way. Traffic stop.
Okay.
I get pulled over, or somebody gets pulled over. How you doing today, sir? Fine. We're headed to town. Where you going? See my buddy. What's your buddy's name? Mike. What's Mike's last name? I don't know. I just met him. Where's he live? In town. What street? I don't know. How you gonna get there? Well, I can find it.
So they just can't. They can't get the
put it together.
specifics. Yeah.
Yeah. But now, if you were to stop me and on Lillard's Ferry, Mr. Walsh, how you doing today? Fine. We're headed into town. What for? Going to the grocery. What you going to the grocery for? We're having a cookout. My kids are coming over, and I got to buy some ice, and I'm supposed to get the pork and meats because my wife fought it. I'm going over to Kroger. Ta-da. You were going too fast. Please be careful. I'll only give you a warning this time. So we have found, even in smuggling operations, we can always do it after the fact.
Uh-huh.
But what I've been teaching immigration and some of our immigration guys and CIS guys and ICE is look for intent. I asked the cops, asked Stan, where is he going? What's he going to do?
Mm-hmm.
So some of the smugglers and terrorist operators will join tour groups. They'll memorize the itinerary where they're going, but they won't have the spatial temporal experience of actually following the itinerary. They'll leave the group, run their smuggling operation, and rejoin the tour group to come back across the states.
Oh, interesting. So now, where are these tours?
Well, the one that I first saw this on was actually a tour in Jerusalem.
Okay.
Where guys had joined the tour and they disappeared. And then my wife and I went on a vacation with Trafalgar tours, and there were some people that came over. They went on a group. They disappeared. But until the last day in Rome, when we got a flight to catch back, then they showed up again. But they never were, and it was a paid tour. But they were nowhere to be seen.
Uh-huh.
So they were hiding in plain sight, as you explained, the liars. They're hiding right in plain sight, right in the middle of the tour group. And so good customs officers and immigration officers at the airport, Border Patrol, will catch those things. Because lying that we talk about is extremely mentally heavy activity.
Right.
Very
cognitive overload. That's why so many things fall off the plate. Yeah. Body language and even tone and pacing and you'll use different words because your brain is taking up so much space trying to remember the story and create it. Yeah.
I was headed to a class in Columbus, Ohio. I was driving up I-75, and I think it was at exit 127. It was after the 4th of July weekend. And somebody left the gate open and all the idiots were out driving up I-75. I mean, it was a NASCAR race.
Yeah.
And I had regretted removing the 50 caliber machine gun from the front of my truck because I wanted to cut some cars and trucks in that. So I thought, got plenty of time. I'm going to pull over here. I'm going to get me a Dr. Pepper and a Reese cup.
Uh-huh. I love Dr. Pepper.
Oh my God. Dr. Pepper and a jar of peanut butter I can make across this Sahara desert. But I was going to sit and relax a bit and just chill out. There's no sense to stroke out on this.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And everybody's had this, somebody come up to you at the grocery parking lot. Can I talk to you for a minute? And you're going, here we go.
Mm-hmm.
This guy comes over and he motions for me to roll down my truck window at the rest stop. So I look in this mirror and I look in that mirror to see what's around me.
Right.
So I window down about this far. Traci, he starts like this. He goes, this may sound funny, but this time it's the truth. That's the first words out of his mouth.
This time it's the truth.
Bing, there's
Those
one.
are the two things. This might not sound right. And this time it's the truth.
Oh my God. So then he took a deep breath. He goes, me and my wife were coming up from Knoxville. We ran out of gas and we did and ran out of gas. So we're trying to find some gas. So the church having to get out of gas. We talked to state police and having some guys in the gas station. So, and we left the rest of my wife left her wallet, purse down in my wallet, in her purse. We didn't come. And he's going as fast as he can because it's a memorized story.
Oh yeah.
So my brain's thinking, wait a minute. Knoxville is at exit 70 and I'm at 127. So that's 290 miles and they're just now deciding they need gas. Wait a minute. When he left the restaurant, what's the last thing you do when you leave a restaurant? You pay for your food. But he said he and his wife, she left her purse and his watch in her purse. They left it at the restaurant. I'm thinking, no, that's the first thing your wife's going to miss. And what did you not? And all that's going through my head.
Right.
While you're doing all this kind of stuff. And he kept going. But now while he's doing this, I noticed he's moving out of my line of sight to here to my center post where I have to turn and see him. He wants money. He wants me to roll my window down and get out my wallet. What's he going to do?
Grab the whole thing.
He's going to rob me.
Yeah.
So I said, I'm sorry, so I don't have any cash. All I have is this thing from Smith & Wesson. I showed him my pistol. All the way across the parking lot. But when you break down, he's learning from his attempts to steal.
Uh-huh.
Somebody mentioned, well, have you talked to the church? They will give you money. So he added that part to his story. Then he said, well, the state police have got a safety patrol. They'll come and help you. Well, he added that part. They couldn't come around. Well, if you're with your wife, does she have her wallet? So he kept modifying the story because he kept getting caught.
Taking out all the excuses.
And trying to take it away from him in the first place.
Oh, man. So he ran. Was there anybody else with him?
I didn't see anybody. No, he was across the truck lot, and I said, oh, Smith & Wesson took care of that one today.
I guess so. All while you're drinking your Dr. Pepper. Okay. So, most interesting case you've worked on?
I think the one that really set me a path on training, that like you and I do, and we try to create an engaging, educational, motivating setup for students. And I thought, if I want to talk to these guys, you have to be in their shoes, the police officers and homicide and all that type of stuff. They had opportunity to sit down in an interview with the American Hospital Security Association, and interview the serial killer, Donald Harvey. Now, he'd already been caught.
Now, we talked about him in class, and it just made my gut, my gut turns pretty easy. I think much more so than the average law enforcement professional.
No, kind of that.
Anyway, okay, so keep going.
So it was an opportunity to sit with him and pick his brain. He was willing to talk.
Mm-hmm.
The idea was then to use that information from him to train to the hospital personnel and hospital security personnel how to look for doctors and nurses or aides or people who are harming patients.
Right, because that's what he did, is that he was an orderly in Kentucky, right?
Yep.
And he ended up poisoning people. Or maybe you can describe it a little more, because it was gross. So
he abused human beings sometimes 4, 5, and 6 times before finally taking their lives. So we know from that behavior, he would take them almost to death and revive them, take them to death and revive them. He only picked on people who couldn't talk, or who were invalid, or who had strokes, or who were Alzheimer's or dementia. He was doing that outside the hospital because he got a pattern. He kept doing it on and on and on. But I wanted to be in that room with someone very evil. And I wanted to understand his thinking. And what helped me understand is the thinking of the bad guys. So now to use that in training for officers, here's things that we look for. You have to think like the bad guy. If you were going to do it. I took 80 hours years ago at University of Louisville, Crime Prevention Institute. And the example I use, think of your house right now. If you were locked out and your husband's away on a trip, there is one place you know that you would go, the easiest for you to break into your own house without making much damage. Bad guys know that same spot.
Okay, interesting. All right, I'm trying to think.
So
my husband has this place locked down tight, so I don't know if I
He's
can.
good.
I'd probably be sleeping in the backyard.
Well, and so we have a big garage door, and we walk Dakota, German Shepherd, in the morning. Our block is exactly a half mile around.
Okay.
It's a stupid side note. So to keep them going nuts and to keep them gaining weight, I started walking.
Okay.
And so since February, I checked this the other day on my Apple Watch. Since mid-February, I have walked over 300 miles.
Wow, Stan. That's a lot.
About 3 miles a day, 21 miles a week. Figure that 15, 16, 18 weeks. So anyway, when we go out, I told Hilda, be sure to put the garage door down before you leave. She said, why? Because there's plenty of places for somebody, if you leave that door open, to walk in and be sitting in the garage out of your viewpoint. And Dakota's a chicken. He's, bless his heart, he's been abused. He is not a guard dog. He is just a big couch cushion. Okay. And he's going to run. So he's not going to attack. But you have to think, if you were the bad guy, what would you do?
Mm-hmm.
And that would be an opening for them. So you have to think like that individual. How would I use the credit card? For example, we had big credit card fraud ring that we busted.
Okay.
And the bad guy, they were getting the credit cards from people's cars at a car wash.
Okay.
And they would run the cards up, and they know the bank procedure that you may not see your credit card statement until 30 days later at maximum.
Right. Yeah. So you got a little time, unless you have alerts set, or unless the fraud department picks up some unusual activity. Like if you're a crook, you have to hope the system breaks down just a little bit. So, okay, keep going.
Yeah. So they would run the cards up, take 2 or 3 days. They'd run them, the dirt off of them. Okay. Then he'd go to a bar. He said, I go to Goodwill. I buy a really cheap wallet, super cheap wallet. I put the stolen credit card, 1 or 2 of them in there, and put about $300 or $400 cash. I'd go and have 2 or 3 beers. I'd make sure I leave or drop the wallet on the floor.
Oh.
And leave.
Uh-huh.
Well, some poor schmuck comes in, finds a wallet. First thing he's going to do is spend the cash, which maybe puts another day between you and the connection. Then he's going to start using a credit card. Who gets burned for the credit card and all the charges?
Oh, the other guy. Oh, man. Oh, that's a new one. I hadn't heard that one.
Yep. So there's common places like that where they're filtering down, letting somebody else take the hit because they didn't think about protecting the card. So if you've got credit cards, absolutely put the alerts on them, get Life Alert, the other card protection programs, let you know this is out of your pattern. Now, sometimes it's a nuisance. I have on my credit cards, I have a notice, because you and I travel a bunch. We got American Express. Mine records every single time a transaction is made, I get a notice.
Ooh, that's good.
Whether it's online or whether I go to a gas station or I just went to the grocery store to cook dinner for my wife tonight. And so as soon as I did my credit card run, I get a notice from my card. You had a transaction at Publix food market for X number of dollars. And it's easy on your app. So it's a good way to tell where the card's being used. If I do on Amazon, I get a ping that says you just bought off of Amazon.
Oh, I like that. Yeah. Because you know who I'm talking to, and we're partnering up a little bit, is ID Shield, and they will help put all that money back if the credit card company gets you on some technicality. But then if your credit gets hurt, you know what they'll do is they're the ones that will handle that all for you and put your credit back in place. And man,
it's a nightmare. For
$20-25 a month, man, that's an invaluable assurance right there. But yeah, the more we can set all those alerts that are just irritating.
Remember John? You know John Cilio?
I know Cilio, yeah.
Yeah, John was a victim of that. And nearly wiped him out. Almost had, it was, if I remember right, his story's like $500,000.
It was a lot. And I think it was ID theft. It was someone he knew that worked for him, stole his identity, bought a house, and he had to, he was going to go to jail for that. And somehow he got out of the country where they couldn't get him and had to work on fixing all that before he could come home.
Yeah. Like, we were thinking about lying, and I like one of the areas that you talk about in body language is how we can use body language for persuasive purposes, but for good purposes about your confidence and so forth in hiring. On the lower end of that scale, there's the light side and there's the dark side. Okay, the light side is influence or persuasion.
Right.
The dark side is manipulation,
social engineering,
and coercion. Okay. One of the things that I have to work against with officers in the accusatory interview, they tend to be manipulative. And not quite coercive, but it can drift into coercion. The manipulation, they withhold information, they lie. These are the bad guys. They don't answer questions, they'll give you information. Okay. And the advantage is always to one side. In persuasion, both parties have input.
Right.
Both parties share influence. Both parties share influence is the tools that you use in persuasion. Okay. Influence is present. Persuasion is a vehicle that gets you to the end game.
Yeah.
The rhetoric. Okay? Well, the manipulation, think about for example, a robocall, all the ways to manipulate you. So they deny you information. Okay. They use scarcity, which you and I use as a sales technique.
Oh yeah, we use it in
Three
sales,
days
but
only. Yeah.
yeah, they
But
use it in Ponzi schemes too. So this is
scarcity.
just for a few people. Like
Yep.
this is
Authority figure,
uh-huh.
IRS. We just had a notice yesterday that came in here in Tampa, Tampa Electric Company, that somebody's calling, so they're Tampa Electric. Your bill is late. If you don't give me a credit card right now, we're going to shut your power off.
Right.
So it's just to play the old IRS schemes, the same thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so time limit, scarcity, authority figure, and you can identify them. The same thing happens when I work in banking in extortion cases. We had one
Oh,
extortion case. So you don't know who the caller is. The caller said they had our teller's mom. If she didn't give the next guy that came in the money, her mom would do it, and you have to do it in 10 minutes. Well, that happened. There was no way that I or the FBI could get to that branch in that 10 minutes because she had no way of identifying that.
right.
And she had, and now if they've got just enough information off the internet, they can convince you of that type of stuff. And so games and news, like if you have your child's name is Susan, so be careful about what are you posting on Facebook and your other social media, because that's engineered back from that.
Oh yeah, because they pick you out, they target you. Hey, do you have a good zip code? Right? What's your? I mean, you can see what the house is worth on Zillow, and they know who to pick. They target you back.
You run across? He's an NSA member, Morgan Wright, WRIGHT.
I don't know him. Who is he?
Morgan Wright. Morgan just done work with the NSA, CIA, the other NSA, CIA, and the FBI Secret Service. He is a computer cybersecurity expert. He's on all the major networks a lot.
Okay.
And talks about how to protect your cyber self.
Mm-hmm.
There was one case he described. I saw him present. He's a phenomenal guy. It's just a ton of information to squeeze into 90 minutes. You know?
Yeah.
And I think it was Bulgaria. And somebody sent a phishing attack. They had got enough information from about 5 or 6 employees in the Bulgarian power company. And so they could spoof an email and they say, "Hey Tracy, I forgot my password to get into the control panel for Tower C. Can I use your password?" Well, they knew that you knew me because they saw us on Facebook as friends, knew that we both worked for the Bulgarian power company. And you go, yeah. And if they had hacked 6 people with enough information, they shut down 80% of the country, entire Bulgaria, their power grid.
Just because they could, or did they?
Engineering. Yep.
Was it a where they have a ransom attack, or was it just?
It was just
because
to show that they could do it.
Yeah. Well, a lot of these hackers, that's how they are. They just want us to see if they can do it. And while that's not a great intent, it's better than hijacking money out of people and things like that. So yeah, it's crazy. Now, okay. Last thing we're going to cover, because I know we talked about this when we were together. Donald Trump. Okay. There's a lot to say about him, but there's also and people go, oh, he's a psychopath, he's a sociopath. I don't want to talk about policies. I want to talk about the way he presents whatever he has to present on that day. Let's talk about, just real quick, the scale between narcissist all the way up to psychopath. What are the differences? Where does he fit? Let's just put the final say on this. I don't know if we have the final or not. Because I think, like him or not, there's definitely some challenges there. And I think he exhibits them more than the average politician. Because I think a lot of people in politics are there for certain reasons other than altruistic ones. So what do you think?
It's in his personality and some of his background kind of gives me a hint. He's a brawler. I noticed and he could say this in different ways. He highballs a figure. So he might highball how bad Kim Jong-il is. You might, he'd say he's really, really bad, or they're really, really bad. They're really, really bad. Then he has leverage to have the power position and negotiation what he wants to do as a business on the business side. I think one of the things that really frustrates him, because he's from 2 different worlds. He's in a world he's clashing. In the business world, you and I know how quickly sometimes you got to make decisions, or to get a contract done, or to get a building done. and the government moves so
Oh, government's so
forever,
slow.
you know, anything done. And he's using that heavy hand with his very dominant personality to push through what he wants done to make things move. He hates inertia, which creates all these ripples, and people don't respond well to that heavy-handedness. We all feel like we're being bullied, we're being intimidated, we're being pushed. A true narcissist would not be as functional. The true narcissistic personality disorder fancies themselves as achieving all these great things without ever having put in the labor to get there. They want all the best of things, the top drawer, they want the top restaurant and everything else, just because I am. But they've never put in the roadwork to get to that. Sociopaths, psychopaths, the one big disconnect that they both share, that technically they're thrown into one group called antisocial, but they're actually two subgroups. One can disappear in society. The other, nature versus nurture, and there's always a big argument where that fine line is. Both of them lack empathy. They can't identify with the victims. The psychopaths, clinically identified ones that I've been seen with, the victim is nothing to them. The victim is responsible. Excellent book that I read, and it's a long, it's about 500 pages. Dr. Robert Hare is our current expert on psychopaths, sociopaths out of Canada, Hare, Robert Hare. The new guy on the horizon is, and it just went brain dead. It's called the Psychopath Whisperer.
Okay.
Psychopath Whisperer. And his name will come to me about 3 o'clock in the morning. I'll sit straight up and remember it. Keith Kyle. Keith Kyle.
Okay.
Keith Kyle. And he sat down and interviewed and did the classification of psychopaths is really clinically hard. It's called a PCL psychopath checklist. He ran the psychopath checklist on a bunch of inmates in Canada. Then he worked in Boston. Then he worked down in Arizona, New Mexico now. And it did an interesting, an MRI, that scans your body. There's a functional MRI that watches the brain. And so he was mapping the brain. So if I were to say to you, honor, okay, you have images to think of what honor is, or integrity, or if I say garage, or if I say microphone, okay, your brain has different registration markers in it. So he used markers that were emotion-based, like love, childbirth, fatherhood, marriage, honor, character, garage, car, Buick, street, sign, etc., and watch the brain's reaction. The psychopath's brain could not distinguish between emotion and animate objects. It was the same thing. So their reaction to anything love was exactly the same reaction when they said or saw the picture of a garage.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
They have no emotional connection. So they tend to victimize endlessly everybody around them. Down in the center of the brain, way deep, he uses MRI and stuff, it's called a P2. It's the part of the brain that likes new things. It's the part of the brain that's curious, and it needs to be fed. He found in psychopaths, sociopaths, that's not working. And so that need is not satisfied. And so the reason it's so abusive and so violent and so aggressive is because they're looking for that stimulus that this thing doesn't respond to. So going back to what we're seeing with Trump, very, very sensory dominant, fast talking.
Yeah.
Not a great speech maker in terms of his language skills. George Bush wasn't either, but Bill Clinton was great. Obama was great. Reagan was great. Tony Robbins is good. And, Nito Cobain, gee whiz, the verbal skills. So his limited verbal skills, he makes up on the other side for his aggressive behavior. So his abruptness and brusqueness shuts people off. And to me, he could watch his Twitter stuff. He could be better with his language. He could be better with his people skills. He's almost like a Patton in some ways. Get it done, 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 get it done. And so he's just thrown the whole political arena into turmoil because of his constant driving, where the Senate and Congress, everybody else wants things take time, let's percolate on it.
Right. So would you say he's on the scale, not on the scale? What's your...
No, clinically, because from the layman's point of view and having done a lot of study on it, all of us will test some on psychopath, sociopath scale. And if I'm right, there's 32 markers.
Okay.
Everybody scores some.
Okay.
And there's a threshold of, and again, I have to go back and look. I think it's 20 or 24 where you really get into the horrific side. He may have more markers than the rest of us, but from my understanding, going back and looking at the analysis, he does not chart there. But then again, you're talking about a layman.
Right. Yeah. It's just, I just thought it was real interesting coming up because I think he definitely has tendencies of a narcissist, but I think it's also real interesting what you said is that a true narcissist won't have done the work and just wants all the credit, can't focus. And so I think that's super interesting. And I think, whatever side you're on, I think it's important to have a little bit of science behind your opinions, right? Yeah. So that you know what's commonly out there and not. And anyway, I just think it's super interesting.
Oh, it's really thrown the political world into turmoil. But then you go back and look, for example, at Harry Truman versus Franklin Roosevelt.
Okay.
Franklin Roosevelt, very much of a populist. He was very popular with the people, and he had a way of reaching and connecting with people. Very warm, the fireside chats and so forth. Where Truman was an extremely analytical person. And he didn't have great verbal skills, great communication skills, but he was a very heavy mental thinker. And so that time he seemed like he's disconnected sometimes when he would talk. So we may be seeing some of that within the personality, the personality set from that extreme.
Yeah.
Ben Carson versus Tony Robbins, for example. Ben Carson, brilliant surgeon. But he could tell a joke. I think we'd miss it. Super nice guy, but it's just his communication set. And it's interesting when we talked about body language. When my dad was a pastor, we had what we call the deaf church, hearing and speech impaired church that met in our church in another part of it. It was old Gothic church. So once every month, that the deaf speaking hearing church would sit in our service, and their pastor would sign language my dad's sermon.
Okay.
So I was just a kid. I was used to being around it. And it's interesting. So think about when you're yelling, your voice is big, right?
Yeah.
Well, when people who sign are angry, their gestures and signs tend to be further from I tend to be larger.
Okay.
When it's something personal, the signs are closer and the zone tends to be smaller. So it's like when you lose your eyesight, your hearing gets better.
Right.
Okay. When you lose your speech skills, your verbal skills get better. So people have low verbal skills tend to have a lot of bad language to make up for it. Then there's that average in the middle. Then you get way over here. The people that
that's super interesting.
Verbal skills, like again, like Clinton, like Reagan, like Tony Robbins, like Cobain. Watching and listening, it's art in motion with their words and their body at the same time because they've mastered both skill sets, both arenas.
Oh, wow. Oh, okay. So, it just gives us a little more to look for because, one of the great things about the riots and the virus is that we haven't seen a lot of political commentary on TV. I think that is fantastic. While I don't want these other disasters to have happened.
To get to that, have to do it that way.
Old, but through everything we've talked about, I think we have more tools in our personal lives and to make better decisions for everything around there. So Stan, any last parting tips for people out there? How can people get a hold of you? Maybe get some of your, because you have a new online class.
Yep.
Maybe jump in one of your classes. Tell us all about that.
Okay. You can find me at theLieGuy.com. And the media gave me that title.
Oh, I love that.
And so as soon as, because when AOL first started, I don't know what our screen name was. I had an arson investigator in class. He said, when you get online, you can send me an email. Oh, it's an email. He said, he was Fire Guy, because there's an arson guy, fireguy@AOL.com. So I got AOL month later, and I'm thinking, screening, what's a screener? Oh, I need fire guy. Okay, so I'll put lie guy.
Uh-huh.
Well, as soon as I got picked up for an interview, somebody, oh, you're the lie guy. And I thought, that's a trademark.
There you go. Oh, I
And
love it.
So thelieguy.com
Uh-huh.
is where you can reach me. There's contact information there. If you've got questions, there's a contact page. Help yourself and give me a call. If you'd like to look at just some of the things that I teach, academy.thelieguy.com. And I have some online training courses anywhere from an hour up to 3 or 4 to 3 hour blocks. Tell you what, how about a free ebook?
Oh, that'd be awesome. How do people get the free ebook?
Okay, 60-page ebook.
Mm-hmm.
It's an overview of my course. Go to the website, thelieguy.com. If it's your first trip, wait for about 3 seconds and a pop-up will come up that you can sign up and get it. Or on that front page, go to store, and you'll see it in the store, and it's listed for price zero. Principles of Consecutive Interrogation, a basic guide.
Oh, cool.
It goes through speech cues, body language cues, a free 60-page ebook that they're welcome to enjoy.
Oh.
And I've got a huge video channel with some of my media stuff and everything on it. YouTube.com/The
Lie Guy, of course. Yes.
About 145 videos up there, but some of them very short, like 3 to 4 minutes long. So just a little tidbit, if you like to pick up on, or an idea. And they cover a few cases, and a few of the media stories I've worked on have been Zamora.
Oh, I love, and your information is so valuable, so relevant to something everybody needs. And even when I watch your videos, I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy's just the master. So,
well, thank you.
So thank you for coming on.
Thanks for inviting me. It's a blast.
Much. Yeah. We'll have you back. We'll have you back when it's time.
And I'll take you to prison one day.
Oh,
then you have some real stories to tell.
Perfect. That'll be good.